battle for Berlin, the last offensive against Hitler's Third Reich, began at precisely 4 a.m. Monday, April 16, 1945, or A-Day as it was called by the Western Allies. At that moment, less than 38 miles east of the capital, red flares burst in the night skies above the swollen river Oder, triggering a stupefying artillery barrage and the opening of the Russian assault on the city. At about the same time, elements of the US 9th Army were turning away from Berlin, heading back to the west to take up new positions along the river Elbe between Tangermünde and Barbie. On the 14th of April, General Eisenhower had decided to halt the Anglo-American drive across Germany. Berlin, he said, is no longer a military objective. When US troops got the word, Berlin, for some of them, was only 45 miles away. As the attacks began, Berliners waited in the bombed rubble of their city, numb and terrified, clinging to the only politics that now counted, the politics of survival. To eat had become more important than to love, to burrow more dignified than to fight, to endure more militarily correct than to win. What follows is the story of the last battle, the assault and capture of Berlin. Although this account includes the story of fighting, it is not a military report, rather it is the story of ordinary people, both soldiers and civilians, who were caught up in the despair, frustration, terror, and rape of the defeat and of the victory. Sirens began wailing the all clear. The 314th Allied raid on Berlin was over. In the first years of the war, the attacks had been sporadic, but now the capital was under almost continuous bombardment. The Americans bombed by day, the RAF by night. The statistics of destruction had increased almost hourly. By now they were staggering. Explosives had laid waste more than 10 square miles of built-up districts, 10 times the area destroyed in London by the Luftwaffe. 3 billion cubic feet of debris lay in the streets, enough rubble for a mountain more than 1,000 feet high. Almost half of Berlin's 1,562,000 dwellings had sustained some kind of damage, and every third house was either completely destroyed or uninhabitable. Casualties were so high that a true accounting would never be possible, but at least 52,000 were dead and twice that number seriously injured, 5 times the number killed and seriously injured in the bombing of London. Berlin had become a second Carthage, and the final agony was yet to come. In this wilderness of devastation, it was remarkable that people could survive it all. But life went on with some kind of lunatic normality among the ruins. 12,000 policemen were still on duty. Postmen delivered the mail. Newspapers came out daily. Telephone and telegraphic services continued. Garbage was collected. Some cinemas, theaters, and even a part of the wrecked zoo were open. Department stores ran special sales. Food and bakery shops opened every morning, and laundries, dry cleaning establishments, and beauty salons did a brisk business. The underground and elevated railways functioned, and the new fashionable bars and restaurants, still intact, drew capacity crowds. And on almost every street, the strident calls of Berlin's famous flower vendors echoed as in the days of peace. Perhaps most remarkable, more than 65% of Berlin's great factories were in some kind of working condition. Almost 600,000 people had jobs, but getting to them now was a major problem. It took hours, traffic was clogged, there were detours, slowdowns and breakdowns. As a consequence, Berliners had taken to rising early. Everyone wanted to get to work on time because the Americans, early risers themselves, were often at work over the city by 9 a.m. On this bright morning in the city's sprawling 20 districts, Berliners had come forth like Neolithic cave dwellers. They emerged from the bowels of the subways, from shelters beneath public buildings, from the cellars and basements of their shattered homes. Whatever their hopes or fears, whatever their loyalties or political beliefs, this much Berliners had in common. Those who had survived another night were determined to live another day. The same could be said for the nation itself. In the 6th year of World War II, Hitler's Germany was fighting desperately for survival. The Reich that had to last a millennium had been invaded from west and east. The Anglo-American forces were sweeping down on the great river Rhine, had breached it at Remagen, and were now racing for Berlin. They were only 300 miles to the west. On the eastern banks of the river Oder, a far more urgent and infinitely more fearful threat had materialized. There stood the Russian armies, less than 50 miles away. It was Wednesday, March 21st, 1945, the first day of spring. On radios all over the city this morning, Berliners heard the latest hit tune, "This will be a spring without end." No part of the city had been completely spared from the bombing, but Spandau, Berlin's second largest and most western district, had escaped the kind of attack everyone feared the most: saturation bombing. Night after night the inhabitants expected the blow. They were amazed that it had not come, for Spandau was the center of Berlin's vast armament industry. Little Spandauites are the last to reach their coffins. Quite certain that no matter what happened, they would not be involved, the rich Spandauans calmly looked to the future. Now the spring was here. The families were trying to decide where to hang the hammocks in the garden. They had their own chores to do. They planted spinach, parsley, lettuce, and early potatoes. There was one major problem for them, though. Should they sow the early potatoes in the first part of April, or wait until the settled spring days of May? However, 25 miles away from the Oder River, Marshal of the Soviet Union, Georgi Zhukov, sat at his desk, pondering of some plans of his own. On one wall, a large map of Berlin showed in detail Zhukov's proposed offensive to capture the city. On his desk were 3 field phones. One was for general use. Another linked him to his colleagues, Marshals Konstantin Rosowski and Ivan Stepanovich Konev, commanders of the huge army groups on the northern and southern flanks. The third phone was a direct line to Moscow and the Supreme Commander, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. The 49-year-old commander of the First Belarusian Front spoke to Stalin each night at 11, reporting the day's advances. Now Zhukov wondered how soon Stalin would give the command to take Berlin. Zhukov thought that he could take the city immediately, but he was not quite ready. Tentatively, he had planned the attack for around the end of April. With luck, he thought he could reach Berlin and reduce all resistance within 10 or 12 days. The Germans would contest him for every inch that he had expected. Probably they would fight hardest on the western edge of the city. There, as far as he could see, lay one clear-cut escape route for the Berlin defenders. But he planned to hit them from both sides as they tried to get out. By the first week of May, he anticipated a wholesale slaughter in the district of Spandau.